In less than 2 months, Ontario's Liberal Party will choose a new leader. It is arguably the second hardest job in politics in Canada today. The province's economy is still sputtering, and the party itself is less popular than it was just a year ago when it won its third consecutive mandate. Let's meet the 7 candidates hoping to become the next Liberal leader of Ontario and Premier of Ontario. In alphabetical order, Eric Hoskins, he's the member for St. Paul's. Gerard Kennedy, former member for Parkdale High Park. Glenn Murray, member for Toronto Centre. Sandra Pupatello, former member for Windsor West. Charles Sousa, member for Mississauga South. Harinder Thakkar, member for Mississauga Arundel. And Kathleen Wynne, the member for Don Valley West. And we're happy to welcome you 7 to TVO. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Couple of items of business before we start. Number 1, full disclosure. I have a 21-year-old son who has a bit of a Jones for politics, and he has decided to work in this campaign for you. So full disclosure, my kid's working for Eric Hoskins' campaign. Second of all, to the audience at home, read nothing into the color of the tie. It just happened to be the next one in row in my closet. That's it. Let's go through this. One of the reasons we wanted all 7 of you in here today was to try and see if we can understand if there are any distinctions among you. You are, of course, all Liberals, but that doesn't mean you all agree on the same stuff. So let's start, and let's just go around. Gerard Kennedy. First question, what's the single most important issue facing Ontario today?
Well, I think it's the economy, but it's related. It's about opportunity. People are feeling that fairness is slipping away, whether they have a job or they don't have one. If they have a job, they worry about mortgages, they worry about the uncertainty of the interest rates and so on. And somehow, they get the sense that the government has done a lot. They want to know when it's going to become something they don't have to worry about. And so I think that's what we have to address. And I think, frankly, we have been going after the big things that relate to that, but we have to be much clearer what the plan is. We have to engage people in how we're going to get jobs, for example, for recent graduates. It's just not a certainty anymore that somebody coming out of university is getting the same opportunities they did a generation ago, and we need to be there in much more certain terms. So I think that's what people are looking for as the first order of business for government.
Single most urgent issue facing the province today?
Well, I agree that the economy and balancing the budget and making sure that we can do all the things that we as Liberals and people in Ontario want. So making sure that our education system, healthcare system stay strong and excellent. So for me, the economy is about all of those things. It's about making sure that we've got all the component parts that make a society equitable, that make a society just, because that's good social policy, but it's great economic policy, because you look around the world and more equitable societies do better. So balancing the budget, getting the economy chugging again, has to do with making sure that our society is on track.
Charles Sousa.
Well, it's about having the right skills for these times, and these are serious times. We have 8% unemployment, we have 18% unemployment for youth, and we got to do better. So it's all about making those decisions to create those jobs. Having spent 5 years as a business owner, 20 years in banking, 25 years in the private sector, and now 5 years in government, as having been minister of various portfolios, I think I have the skills necessary to enable us to create those jobs, improve our prosperity by way of economic growth, so that we can afford the things that matter in public service.
Eric Hoskins.
Well, you're beginning to see that we're agreeing on this, that the number one priority is jobs in the economy, but it's to make sure that we have equal access to opportunity and prosperity. And I think it's important, and Ontarians have told me as well when I meet with them going across this province, that it's important that we do it in a way which is compassionate, that protects the vulnerable, that makes sure that those who perhaps need a little extra assistance or a hand up, that we're also helping them. And it's important, the reason why jobs in a strong economy are important, and not just for the opportunity and prosperity of our families and individuals, but it's so we can continue to fund and grow our great education system, our healthcare system, and the social services that we rely on.
Glenn Murray.
Biggest challenge is knowing what to do about it. We talked about child poverty earlier. Well, a lot of those 20,000 kids will fall back into poverty because one of the things that kept them out was the HST transfer check. So the tax cuts I proposed for middle income people will actually keep those kids out of poverty. They'll put between $300 and $1,000 back into low income and middle income families. Desperately needed, critically important. Small businesses need capital. That's what they really need. I tabled a paper yesterday endorsed by some of our leading economists that will create about $2 billion right away and give the government about $1.9 billion in new tax revenues while creating the best environment for investment in business and growing businesses anywhere in North America. And education, I agree. Education, the skills that people need. So I proposed, on top of the other work I did as minister, a no tuition down tax write off that will allow every middle class family to have middle class kids again, because it changes the way that we pay for tuition so everyone can afford it. So we need a leader who knows how to do these things.
Sandra Pupatello.
Thanks. The reason that I'm running for leader, and the reason that I think the number one issue really is jobs in the economy. While I was out of politics this last year and a half or so, no one was talking about the economy or jobs. I'm bringing that back into the conversation, and I want to run for leader to do that. I think that we got mired in a lot of things that people will regret now, not being able to see sort of consequences of some of the things that happened this year. We got to get back to talk about jobs. When the economy's strong in Ontario, everything else follows. It means we have the funding we want for healthcare, the kinds of things we want to do for our parents and our children with the health system. It tells us we have the money that we need for education so we can continue the great investments that we've been making for our kids in schools. But we can't do it unless the economy's flourishing. And right now we're struggling. We've regained 130% of the jobs we lost from the recession to today, but we know against North America, we've got lots of work to do. We're still too tired, too mired, stuck with the US economy, so we've got to do more work, and I intend to do that.
Harinder Thakkar.
The Ontarians are looking for hope and prosperity, and we can only give them hope and prosperity if we improve the economy and also address the issue of the huge deficit this province is facing. And hope and prosperity only comes in when people have a high-paying, good jobs that are sustainable. People came to this province, people came to this country because they wanted to have a better future. The better future only comes in when people can actually go to work. They can also see their children when they graduate from universities that they have work. So I think the biggest issue facing us is to get the economy moving by a workable plan. That plan actually is going to work.
As I look to understand the distinctions among you, I think I found one. And I want to start with you, because I think you just said nobody's been talking about jobs or the economy in the year and a half that you've been away, including Premier McGuinty and the Liberal government?
The whole bunch. And I got to tell you that when you're on the outside like I was, no one was talking about the economy. And when I started talking about the economy, people said, yeah, we want to get to that. When I went to Coburg yesterday, that's what they were talking about. And when I was on the phone last night with 17 leaders of the North, that's what they were talking about.
And the McGuinty government has not
Steve,
been.
you know what?
It's been a conversation about a lot of very important things for a whole bunch of reasons. Minority government, number one. We're not used to that. I'm used to having to fight in the House because I came from opposition. And I recognize that in a minority environment, the whole world is different from the 2 terms of government that most of the folks here have had. But I was there in 1995. I was there watching what Mike Harris was doing when he had a majority government. He wasn't talking about jobs either, but the economy was flourishing.
Okay, let's get some feedback.
Well,
Kathleen Wynne.
I think the reality is we wouldn't have recovered 130% of the jobs that we lost before the downturn if we hadn't been talking about jobs in the economy. We absolutely have been. And the Southwest Ontario Development Fund, the Eastern Ontario Development Fund that we've put in place have created jobs, have put in place support for business. So we absolutely have been talking about jobs.
I think the media government has to at least get credit for the fact there's been 2 recoveries that it accomplished. And I've been out for longer, for the last 5.5 years, but essentially there was a recovery from Mike Harris, and that was in public services and in modernizing and putting us somewhere else and where we had to be on energy, on education, on a bunch of things. And then there's a recovery from the recession. So, Senator, it's not quite fair to say that jobs, I think jobs were an obsession for the government. I think if you look at what we're doing in the North, look what we're doing in agriculture and so on, what's missing is a way to pull all that together in a way that meets what Mr. Drummond's talking about, which is transformational. Transformational isn't just running better government services, it's how do we inspire our business leaders for, whether you call it dead cash or not, whether it's money that isn't being employed, we still have a lot of young people, a lot of people who are in temporary or in uncertain jobs. That's where we have to be laser beam on. So I don't think it's not about talk, it's about translating some of that into a more focused plan in a way that engages the wider business community and the wider Ontario community.
Well, and it's not only that we've recovered 130% of the jobs that we've lost, which is much better than the situation in the United States, but also those are good, high-paying jobs. 80% of them are full-time jobs. But what we haven't done enough of, perhaps, is if you're over the age of 25, the unemployment rate is less than 6% now, which is actually, it's come down below the level it was before the recession. Unless you happen to be under the age of 25, then that unemployment rate, when you include those young persons under 25 who are no longer looking for employment, it's almost 20%. So almost 1 out of every 5 of our young people in this province aren't able to find jobs. We have the best education system in the English-speaking world. We have the highest level of participation in the OECD and the industrialized countries in terms of the participation in postgraduate education. But then for some reason we seem to hit a wall. And I know it's a global circumstance, partly, But what I'm calling it a crisis. We need to invest in our young people, our young entrepreneurs, making sure they're getting the skills that they need.
The allegation from your colleague here is that you guys haven't talked jobs in the economy enough in the past couple of years.
You know, over the last, certainly last 5 years since I've been there, we have been concentrating on our economic recovery after the recession, and we've done a good job in terms of bringing back those jobs. In fact, it was our government that stepped up to the plate, the only sub-jurisdiction in North America to help the automotive industry. Others called it corporate welfare, but we protected over 400,000 jobs. And what we need to do now going further is increase that attraction of investment into Ontario. We are the second or third now largest jurisdiction in North America, in the world for that matter, for that investment, and the retention rate here is very high. What we need to do is look at secondary manufacturing. We need to do more processing in Ontario and branding of Ontario to the world markets.
Glenn Murray?
So I'm still not hearing a plan. So I agree. I don't agree with Sandra. Bailing out the auto sector, which you were part of, and I think was one of the best things. One of the reasons I ran 3 years ago was because of the legacy of this government, which I'm very proud of. I wish I had been part of it the way that Harinder and Kathleen. I think we should all be very proud of that. We turned this economy around coming out of 2008 like none other, and we fought the opposition parties who disagreed with us. So the question for us now is, where do we go next? Because the next thing we do is not bail out the auto sector again. So what you do? So 4.4% of companies now are generating almost 50% of their jobs. And they're generating the jobs that Eric is talking about because it's young people. These are 19 to 25-year-olds who are starting these companies. So I put out a policy yesterday, which I'm hoping I'd love to debate, which basically says it'll bring in $2 billion of additional tax revenue, reduce the tax on high-risk capital that you need to fuel these companies because they burn through capital, and provoke all that dead capital, Mark Carney is out there, to get it working to create businesses in Cornwall and small towns across that and our big cities. So I'm hoping that, what I bring to this is a competency and understanding of this new economy. I think we did the right things in 2003 and 2008. I'm proposing the things we need to do in 2013. And I think if we do this, we'll be able to bring our deficit down faster and grow companies faster.
You say that you have led a recovery that is among the best in North America, and part of the cost of doing that is a deficit which is now clocking in at $14.4 billion. I understand you felt you had to make those investments in order to help turn things around, but now we got to do something about that. I think you're the one candidate who is talking about balancing the budget a year ahead of everybody else.
Yes, sir.
And I think we need to understand how you plan to do that.
Yeah, let me tell you, I think it is really important for us to balance the budget as quickly as we can. I think that there are a couple of reasons for it. If we want to attract foreign direct investment in this province, and if we don't balance the budget, we will stifle the economy. So I'm proposing 3 measures on that front. One is that we have to make this economy grow. How can we make this economy grow is I am proposing a 100-day plan in which we will focus on actually helping our small business to really grow. We will help them by having a holistic approach which will focus on increasing productivity, providing them the access to the capital that we need to provide them, but also helping them to actually open the global markets. I was in Markham yesterday at Nova Plastic. You were there before me. I mean, you talk to this person, he has come up with an excellent idea to actually penetrate the global market, but he needs some assistance from the government to do that. The second is we also need to assist people who create jobs in this province. That's why I'm proposing that we should give them employment tax credit. So those are the revenue measures that, in my mind, will increase the GDP at least.
But you know the NDP is offering the same thing.
But not the same thing, actually, not the same thing. They were offering 10% credit up to a maximum of $10,000, 5% credit up to a maximum of $10,000. That means is you have to earn $200,000 in order to get the tax credit. Let me just say the second step.
Finish the thought. Yeah.
I think the other point is we need to also work on the reducing costs in this province as well. So I'm also proposing that we should reduce our Ontario Public Service by 3% in 3 years. And that is quite doable if we do it by actually attrition and also by the retirements.
Okay, Sandra
I think it's fair to say that this year is very different from the last 2 terms of government that I was a part of. And number one, it's a minority government. And that means there isn't the opportunity like we had before to do whatever we want, whenever we want it. And that's when, in my view, you need to stop and say, what does the opposition want? And how can we incorporate that into our everyday governing structure, which I don't believe we've done well this year. We need to reach over. If economy is number one, we say to the NDP and we say to the Conservatives, What's your take on the economy? What ideas do you have that we can actually use? So even if Harinder's got a great idea on a tax credit and it's similar to the NDP, I'll bet Harinder can work with them and bring them on side to us.
So you're the reaching out candidate?
Absolutely.
You are?
Not only that, Steve,
I'm not
and
hearing
to be
that,
fair,
for what it's worth.
but to be fair, I want to tell you that I'm the one with the experience in opposition, like Gerard has, where when you sit in opposition, you know you want to be respected, because I was there. I know what it feels like to be there as well.
I wouldn't pretend, though, that we
So-
were respected in opposition under
No,
Mike
we
Harris.
weren't, but we want that,
far
and you
from
know
it.
you
we-
need to have
so
it.
we have to reach much further back to find an accord or to find a conservative minority that worked and so on. And yet, that is what Ontario wants. So how are we going to do that? And I think what we have to do is we've got to bring business and labor and NGOs to the table. We have a summit report that's coming up soon. It could be a jumping off point. But we've got to show, frankly, what people want Liberals to do, which is that we need to drive a consensus on an action plan for the economy that is more than 6 months, that is more than 1 or 2 measures, that's going to be for the next 2 years. And I'm prepared to convene that kind of table, take some of the poison out of the legislature and the hyperpartisanship, and also start arising out of that to set targets that Ontarians can then see what are we going to do with the particular, what Eric has effectively raised about effective 19.5% youth unemployment rate. What are we going to do with some of the weaknesses out there for people with disabilities and so on?
Am I hearing this right, that we need a harmonizing candidate for this party as opposed to a polarizing candidate for this party?
Well, yes, but I think you also need somebody
So who
who's
is
going to take
So
responsibility
who is that?
for pulling that agenda together.
Kathleen, then
the
Charles.
thing is, being in opposition is a very different exercise than what we need right now. So we need somebody who can bring people to the table, and not just the opposition parties, although that's the first outreach, but can bring business leaders, can bring labor to the table and solve some of these practical problems. One of the good things about this leadership race is that we are tabling a lot of ideas. I'm talking about providing internships, opportunities for young people to have exposure to different industries. I'm talking about looking at payroll taxes that small business have. Are they the right ones? Should we move thresholds? There are a lot of good ideas, but there's not just one idea that's going to be the answer. There's going to be an exchange, and that has to be what happens after the leadership.
Charles Sousa.
So there's been a number of pieces of legislation I put forward that got unanimous support, be it payday loans legislation, be it financial literacy, be it health and safety in the labor market. And those are the kind of things that we share in common with the opposition. And I say to you, what we don't need is a combative or sort of a confrontational attitude dealing with the opposition at this point, because we're in a minority situation. Ontarians expect us to work together to get it done.
Is one of the candidates around here
more
combative than
and
the
I've
rest?
said to you, I've done that many times already, because we need to be collaborative.
Who's too combative to be leader here?
Well, I'm not going to get into that. I'll let the others decide. But what we do need to do is be progressive and forward-thinking. That's why I've put forward a number of infrastructure, long-term visionary plans to produce greater revenue, greater prosperity in the long term, and greater GDP.
Eric Hoskins.
Well, we also need to remember that it's not the role of government to create jobs. The role of a premier and their government is to create the conditions across the province so that the private sector can create jobs. And that's something we need to invest in. We need to remind ourselves of that. We also can't leave out, we're here in Toronto, we can't leave out the majority of this province that is rural or small town or the north, and making sure, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, so we need to make sure that agribusiness, for example, is the second largest industry in this province. We need to continue to support that and grow that. We have, in this city, we have the majority of people that were actually born outside of Canada, so we need to capitalize not only on their talent here in this city and in this province, but also the connections that they have to their home countries and being able to build trade with us.
Glenn Murray.
So we're Liberals, and we all like each other a lot, and I'm darn proud of this group. I'd be happy with any of these guys as premier, especially over the opposition. But we have differences, and we see different problems. I disagree with Eric. Government plays a critical role because the tax system now is so consequential to investment. And because the biggest thing holding jobs recovery back in Ontario right now is there's only half as much investment dollars as business needs to grow. So I don't agree with Harinder and Andrea Horwath. I don't think $5,000 is holding people back. As a matter of fact, I know it's not. I don't agree with Brad Duguid and my friend Sandra. I think the regional development funds are good. I wouldn't cancel them, as some people have suggested. They fix local problems. You need to dramatically change the tax system. I proposed yesterday a way to dramatically change the tax system. I went to John Ruffalo, Roger Martin, Rafi Hofstein, Mark Chamberlain, and I said, is this enough to get $2 billion in more tax revenue? Is this enough to get young people working? And they said yes. I'm waiting to hear, and this is the threshold for me for premier, because we may end up having to support each other at the end. One of us may not have enough votes. So, if I don't make it, what's the price of my support? You better have a plan that gets the capital. You better find a way to keep, when the HST, as we all know, transfers aren't there next year. A lot of kids are going to fall back into poverty. I presented a way in which middle-class tax cuts and low-income tax cuts will keep those kids out of poverty. I've presented a way to get, for 70% of the jobs and 100% of the middle-class jobs, to get all those kids in education affordably. We have to face the electorate. We better have a very specific plan, not a bumper sticker.
Harinder Tucker.
Yeah, to me, nobody has monopoly on ideas. I think we can all have good ideas, but if we work together as a group, we can come up with a workable plan. Kathleen said that we need to bring people to the table. I think bringing people to the table is a good idea, but not just bringing to the table solves anything. We also need to actually listen to them, listen to their ideas, and implement those ideas. I think if we can start working with the people, taking their ideas and not being too partisan about it, I think we can come up with solutions that the people are looking
That's
for.
why I'm proposing that we need to think outside of what we've done up to now. The legislature has not been successful to that task. It's not just because people didn't understand it was a minority. It simply, we haven't been able to the public interest hasn't been able to prevail. And I think that's where, again, labor, NGOs, and business need to get specific proposals from the government. They could be Glenn's, they could be others, though I prefer to see that we start picking sectors in this province that are going to have the biggest prospect of generating good jobs. We have to use our moral suasion as government. I agree that government can't produce the jobs, but if we don't stand for good jobs and we don't start to arrange, we have $14 billion committed now in a variety of tax breaks. How many of those are producing the jobs that we really want and need? And so, that's the kind of debate that we need to structure and make available. And frankly, in order to get somewhere in Ontario these days, we're going to have the wider community, which is not an admission of failure for the legislature. It simply means that we're going to have to refine some of these questions, including the date of the deficit. So, Harinder, I mean, you said something provocative there, and we're going to have to say, what are the trade-offs against that for those jobs for young people, for that tax credit for low-income families?
Okay, Kathleen, hang on. Kathleen Wynne.
All the tax cuts and tax credits, because we do have tax credits in place. We have made enormous tax cuts in our business sector. So what are we getting for that? And where are the jobs? And I agree with you, Harinder. Obviously, when people come to the table, it's about sharing those ideas and forging. I mean, I don't know that it's government taking the ideas to that table, Gerard. I think it's eliciting those ideas, drawing on the people who actually know what's working. For me, one of the major conditions that has to be in place is our infrastructure. If we look at our bridges and our roads and our transit systems around the province, we've got a lot of work to do. We're behind. And that's a major condition for bringing business to the province.
Hang on 1 second. No, Sandra
I just have
Puputella.
to say that right now we're running for leader of the Liberal Party, and that means that we have to get out there and listen to Liberals and find out what Liberals want to see in their leader.
What's the answer to that?
They want to see somebody defend the things that we've done for 2 terms that went really well. The investment in infrastructure, the investment in hospitals, in nurses and doctors, and go out there and tell the NDP and the Conservatives, we remember what it was like when they were the government, and defend the record that it went well. Also say, we're prepared to change. So which of us really can show the public we changed? Is it those that were at cabinet? Maybe. Is it those of us that weren't? Maybe. All I'm suggesting is, if we aren't prepared to stand up and say, the public told us they did not like what was happening this year, we want you to be different, then the question for the Liberals who are electing this leader is, will you be different? And that to me is the
Charles
question.
Sousa and then Eric Hoskin.
We were all at cabinet at one point or another. Some have been career politicians, more so than others. What I say to you, and to Eric's point, it's businesses and entrepreneurs that produce jobs. Government's role is to facilitate that production of jobs and to initiate and provide those incentives. We further need to do investments in our economy over the long term. That's the role government can play. So I'm telling you, and I'm suggesting, that those that I've heard from around the province that I've visited, they want a high-speed rail system from Windsor to Quebec City. They want us to get started on that. It's been over 30 years in discussion.
Can we afford that right now?
Pardon me?
Can we afford that right
Absolutely,
now?
we can afford. We can afford not to do it. That's the issue. We also need to do a regional transit system in the GTA and the Greater Gordon Horseshoe so that we get rid of the political gridlock as much as the literal gridlock.
Well, and
Eric
that's another
Hoskins.
Well, I
point,
think
which
it's a good
Hang on,
point, Sandra, if you'll allow me just
sister.
for a minute. I think it's important that we talk about these investments, and obviously if we can afford them as well. But there's another question here as well. Is I think we need to be honest with ourselves as a party, as the Liberal Party that we have, that Ontarians are feeling that we are out of touch with them. We need to connect with them. We need to build their confidence and their trust. And I think it's really important that listening, whoever mentioned it, that listening exercise that we're doing over the next couple of months is incredibly important, not just with the Liberal membership, but with all Ontarians.
Let me ask a follow-up on that then. If the public is ticked off with this party right now because of some of the things that have happened over the past year, and the public opinion polls suggest there is some ticked-offedness out there, does she and does he have an advantage because they haven't been there for a year and a half or 5.5 years?
Well, I think what Ontarians are looking for is they're looking for a fresh face, and they're looking for perhaps a different type of politician as well. I've had experience in this Liberal provincial cabinet for the last 3 years, but I also have an entire career of 25 years as a medical doctor, as a family doctor, which frankly has taught me how to listen to people probably better than anything else. I've also started and run with my wife, Samantha Nutt, a not-for-profit organization, a multi-million-dollar organization. I know how to stretch a dollar. In fact, I know how to work very well under extremely challenging circumstances like the one that we're facing. And so I think, and I grew up in rural Ontario as well, I think we need somebody who can connect with all Ontarians.
Okay, I want to ask Glenn Murray the same question. Is it an advantage for Sandra Pupatello and Gerard Kennedy that they haven't been here for the past year?
No, but I don't think it's advantage either way. I'm very proud of her record, and they screwed a few things up. I'm very proud of my record. We're human. We screwed a few things up. We have to have each other's back, because no government, I think in 10 years, anywhere in North America turned around the economy the way that ours did.
War is perfect.
And quite frankly, though, and I just want to say one thing about listening, though, because my friend Alison Redford, always said something very elegantly. She said,
Premier of Alberta.
Premier of Alberta, thank you. Who she said, I've been around long enough to find out where the washroom is, but not long enough to be part of the furniture. And so we all bring different perspectives to that. That's important. Listening is important. I convene almost every month, and I've shared this with some of my colleagues, meetings with my city councillors. And my constituents have identified 11 neighborhoods, and you can go to torontocenterplan.org, I'll do a little plug for it. And we've written together a plan with all the community leaders that they've written. So I don't try to be their voice, I try to lift their voices up. The work I'm proposing right now isn't something I just came out that I invented. It's not Glenn's idea. I've worked with some of the best folks, and when Sandra was EDI minister and Kathleen was education minister, we reached out. We did the social innovation agenda together. You and I, Kathleen, have worked on social enterprise together. These are all ideas that we have listened. But now's the time to lead, because you're not just running for leader of the Liberal Party. You're leading. You're going to be premier. I was mayor of a city. I know what it's like to get up in the morning, face a massive deficit.
Forgive me, jumping in. We're literally halfway done already, and there's tons of stuff we haven't got to yet. So I want to talk education. The Minister of Education today said that she was content with the notion of elementary and secondary teachers going on rolling one-day strikes where they wanted to and where they felt it was necessary around the province of Ontario. You know, the official opposition has come back and said that's outrageous, they should be legislated. You should use Bill 115, which you passed, to make sure that these strikes don't happen. I want to start with the former education ministers and then get everybody in on this. Do you support this position? In inverse order in which you had the job, that's you first. Kathleen Wynne.
I have said all along, the most painful moment for me in my political career so far has been the day that I walked out of my office and there were protesters in front of my office, people I had worked with since 1987 in one way or another, and they were protesting a very difficult decision that our government made. So I think that this is a situation that has spiraled down. I'm very concerned about it. I think the Premier has made it clear, and I certainly agree that the way the process started was not the way it should have started.
Would you legislate them back right now?
I do not agree with, I have never thought that we should have legislated collective agreements. So I think the decision that the minister has made today to allow this to roll out, to have an expression of the right to strike, which is something that was part of the debate around the bill, I think that's a good thing. But the whole thing is not good. The whole situation is bad. So wherever we are on January 28th, Steve, what I want to do is we need a new system. We need a new process that respects local bargaining, but has a more formalized provincial.
Sandra Pupatello, you had the job before she did. Are you content with today's decision?
I want the teachers to know that they're going to have a relationship with me as Premier that they had with me as Minister of Education. I got along with teachers. I understood that they're part of the implementation of terrific policy. Today I'm concerned. Parents are worried. They don't know whether their kids are going tomorrow to school or not. Every 5 minutes the text that their kids are sending them is different.
So would you use the tools in Bill 115 to prevent a strike?
I have to tell you that I'm concerned about the content of Bill 115 for sure. I think my disadvantage is not being there to get all the information that went into the bill in the first place. So what I know what I need to do at the end of January is figure out what's left. Most of the bill kicks in at the end of December. What is going to be left with us?
But there is a provision that allows you to go right now and say to elementary teachers and secondary teachers, no,
listen,
you can't strike.
I said today, when you asked us today, I said today that we agreed, and all of us agreed with what the Minister of Education did today. And I still do. Okay. What I know is that we've got a lot more work to do to be bringing our teachers back to the table.
Gerard Kennedy.
Well, listen, I have to say, the Bill 115 approach is a mistake, and we're now, the sad dividend is if any time is lost at all. So I want to say right now to the locals out there, don't go out. Don't take time away from students, because there's nothing to be gained. And to the minister, I would say, we need to pull back here into a place where we can get good deals. And I support the government trying to get those deals, but there is nothing in the current circumstance to be lost except goodwill from parents. You know, before we came into power, and was lucky enough to be the minister, there were 55,000 kids that left public school. Their parents took them out, put them in private school. We're losing our consensus for public education. Sadly, enough conflict goes on, and parents make those kinds of decisions. So everybody has to take some responsibility. And I think there's a robust debate going on in the province right now, among the Liberal Party, about how to best handle this. And I hope that there is some capacity among all the people involved here, because there are boards, there are teachers, to make this not happen. Because I'm frankly not in favor of 115 leads.
Let me get everybody. Charles Sousa, would you allow the one-day rolling strikes?
As a past Minister of Labour, I recognize and believe that the best agreements are the collective agreements at the bargaining table. Those are the ones that matter. Those are the ones that get done. And I believe, and the teachers, they've been the backbone of our education system. We've had some great success over the past 9 years. We've become one of the best in the English-speaking world when it comes to education by way of graduation rates and by way of performance. And the teachers are to be commended for those actions as well. They recognize the fiscal situation that we have before us. Right. Though September 1st was that rollover date, that was critical, one of the reasons why the legislation came into being. I believe they have the right to strike, and I do agree that they should have that right now.
Eric Hoskins, was Bill 115 a mistake?
Well, I think, first of all, I think the decision made by the minister today was a positive decision, and I hope it's the beginning of reaching out and trying to rebuild that relationship. It's going to take some very important collaborative leadership on both sides, all sides, frankly. I have a 7-year-old who's in the public education system. He's asking me about whether he's got a PD day tomorrow, but he's wondering if next week he's going to have a strike day. And so I know a lot of families and parents are very concerned about the impact that this deterioration in the relationship between our teachers and our government, the impact that it's going to have on the children, on our students and their families. So I think, and I've also spoken about Kitchener-Waterloo, the by-election last September, where, quite frankly, we took a decision as a party, political operatives did
to remind everybody, you came third, NDP came first.
Well, and I think it was partly because we took an approach where we disrespected our teachers. We tried to drive a wedge between them and the students and their families, and I think that was wrong, and certainly as Premier, I would never allow that to happen. I would never disrespect our teachers, because it's them and education assistants, workers rather, and our administrators and the government together. We've built the best education system in the English-speaking world.
Glenn Murray, would you use the tools of Bill 115 to prevent these rolling strikes?
Only as a last resort, and what concerns me is that we're not doing what I think we need to be doing right now. Well, this was going on. My ministry, we were negotiating with OPSU, with the college faculty, all the same teachers. We got a 0-0, we got a reasonable agreement. I deal with OSSTF. I was at their convention. I went out and talked to Sam Hammond, and I said, look, if I'm Premier, can we start on a clean slate here? Can we actually work that? I really believe, CAW came in with lower entry-level salaries at McMaster University, and they saved $500,000 a year in operating. They actually saved us money. That was brilliant negotiations. Why I would be asking the education minister, if I was Premier right now, to sit down, bring everyone together, lay out these very successful agreements that we've already achieved without Bill 115, and say to those unions, I'll take Bill 115 back, but you pick something within this framework and do that. Now, if they're sincere in what they've been telling me, and because we've been all meeting them in protest, and I spent quite a lot of time, then that's the quid pro quo for labor peace. They accept the 0. But Don Drummond made the point, and I just want to say this. Wage freezes are short term. I've yesterday tabled a way to get $2 billion more revenue to grow that, and the tax plan I introduced actually increases teacher salaries and every other middle-class family more than they lost. So you can actually restore teachers' income with the tax plan for all middle-class
Haven't heard
families.
Harinder Thakkar yet.
Yeah, my feeling is, we are here because we have some fiscal challenges, and our teachers understand that. And we had the same challenges in the previous government as well, because they basically reduced a lot of funding to the school boards. At that time, we were able to sit together with the teachers, and we were able to negotiate the agreements that were in the best interest of the students at that point of time. I think we need to take a little different approach. We need to bring them back to the table and negotiate this out in the interest of the teachers, but more importantly, in the interest of the parents and the students. I think that is what is really important here. We don't want the students to suffer. We don't want the parents to have an inconvenience. But at the same time, we also would need to protect the rights of the
Kathleen and
Yeah,
then Gerard.
I
Kathleen and
think, I
Gerard.
think the other thing is that we have all had a good working relationship with the education sector. So it's been with school boards, it's been with support staff and teachers. So there's not just one of us who has had that relationship. It's been collective. And, you know, the people who weren't at the table for the last year had that good relationship. We all have had that good relationship. So what's important about that is we've gotten a lot done. You know, I was the Minister of Education when we started to bring in full-day kindergarten. The test scores have gone up. Gerard started us on the road to having
Okay,
specialist
but you've
high skills
crossed them
majors.
now. You've crossed them now, and they're very angry.
We have, but having said that, I understand that, but we still, as individuals, have good working relationships. We need to draw on that. And I don't think there's anybody in the education sector who believes that Tim Hudak will be a better premier for this
They don't
province than
care.
will.
So here's
and I'm going
my-
to put that to you.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Well, and
They've
my-
all said to me, we don't care if we end up getting
Well-
Tim Hudak because we need to punish you guys for going back on your
But-
word on
but
us.
What people say,
That's
in
what
a,
I've heard.
what people say in a motion to picket line, and I visited every one of them at every one of our events, and there certainly is a deeply held sense of grievance and sense of that a relationship. We had actually a working relationship with teachers, and that they've been let down. But you know, I'm committed as Premier to ensure that we get a fair and reasonable agreement with teachers. We'll redo what we have to do. We will make sure it's fair to the Treasury. I do agree with what people have made this comment.
Can you do
Teachers
both?
know that yes, you can, and that's the small tragedy if this was to escalate. It is workable. Our first arrangement, people said we'd never get. We got 4-year deals for less than the industrial average. We were able to save money, hire 9,000 new teachers, able to bring up test scores. Dropout rates are down by 50%. And the point about that is not, it was teachers that accomplished that, education workers that accomplished that, and the climate that allowed them to do it was one that the government helped to set. Now, somehow, there has to be a pulling back from both sides. And I'm hoping that that's still.
everybody.
We've got
Okay.
deals. We've got agreements. Remember, there are French teachers, and support workers, and there are
Catholic
English
teachers.
Catholic teachers who have deals.
But what we don't have, unfortunately, right now is the working environment
Right.
that I call transformational simply
Right.
because we didn't pay for it. We basically, you get an environment, people go out and they work hard and they're committed, they do this stuff for kids, and then you get the results. And that's what we need to
It's
do.
possible to create that environment.
Well,
it's
no,
not
but-
that it's not
but I-
possible to create that environment.
Let's not assume
Eric,
that
we
it's
need to work with
necessarily
them.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what we have to keep our eye on.
Eric Hoskins.
Let's not assume that it's necessarily inevitable that there won't be an agreement or that things are going to actually escalate. We still have 3 more weeks left. Remember back in June, early July with the OMA, it was the same thing. Negotiations had broken down. There were unilateral decisions being made, very acrimonious. There was, in the media, there was, the two sides were at each other, the government and the 25,000 doctors in Ontario. However, over the course of the summer, with strong collaborative leadership, the two parties were able to get together, have private talks, which led to talks resuming in the fall. We had an agreement, and that agreement is going to be successful.
Very
Stand by.
timing.
Sandra Pupatel and then Glenn Murray.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think our premier took the very first really important step a couple of weeks ago. He started talking to the media about sort of a reflection of his time. And even he said that if he understood some of the consequences and what's happened since certain decisions came out in a certain way, he knows that there could have been a better outcome. He said that. And that was, to me, a really big step, not just to talk to teachers, because it's happened in other places too with other issues or what they're dubbing as scandals this year. He's saying that we took the first step, we're acknowledging that things could have done better. And we want to be part of that.
It's going to take a little bit of a leap of faith, but I do think it's there to be had in the sense that there is a strong track record on the part of the Ontario Liberal
That's
Party.
the legacy of a good relationship.
And the caucus, and the strain is there, not trying to pretend there isn't, but we need that because we need to build on that, because not just because the alternatives are so much worse, simply
wanted
because
to-
there's good things that can be created with
Glenn
them.
But the alternatives are worse.
First of all, I take no credit for the education legacy. That was the premier and 3 people here. had three amazing education ministers, and I really mean that. And we do have a legacy we want to restore, and I think it's in jeopardy. The question is Bill 115 now part of the solution or part of the problem? Early on, I'll tell you, as a minister in college universities, the threat of legislation brought a lot of those unions, because when my friend Dwight said, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and everyone voluntarily get a zero, we didn't get very far. So we moved it. But not all teachers' unions are the same. OWECTA, let's not forget, has signed an agreement. Under some duress, but they signed an agreement. ETFO sent less than 60 minutes in the room, and our last experience with them wasn't that much more positive. And OSSTF, which I think is quite willing to come to the table in a reasonable way, is probably, where that Bill 150 may be a bigger problem with them than it is with others. I'm not the education minister right now, but as I said, I think there has to be a quid pro quo here. I think if what we're hearing, and I think we're all hearing that there's a willingness to accept the fiscal reality to move that forward.
Forgive me, I got to jump in. We're down to 10 minutes. We haven't talked about poverty yet. We're going to talk about poverty today at the Canadian Club, where we all just did this before. I had people coming up to me afterwards and saying, you must ask about poverty, and so we shall. Charles Sousa, to you first. There are deficit reduction imperatives out there. There are people who want us to make some progress on fighting poverty. Can you do both at the same time?
They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, we have to. We have to be progressive. We look at what is happening in the world today, and we look at what's happening in the opposition. The extreme views of both sides is not the answer to our issues. We need to be progressive. We need to be fiscally responsible in order to attack the deficit, in order to create more prosperity, and we need to help those most vulnerable, and we need to be socially and environmentally compassionate. And what I suggest is that we need to continue to break that cycle of poverty. Deb Matthews, in her report, did a good job of putting forward some recommendations that we all participated in our own town hall meetings and discussions with stakeholders. And certainly others that have had their hand in those most vulnerable have done a good job. Certainly, for instance, Lankin and others coming forward with their report have put great recommendations. What we need is to ensure that our young people, especially the children, don't get caught in the same issues as has occurred in the past. They need to be well educated, and they need to have some of that jobs and opportunities going forward. It's not about more government, it's about more opportunity.
Eric Hoskins, can you fight poverty and the deficit at the same time?
Well, you have to, and absolutely you can. For the last year prior to this leadership race beginning, I was chair of the province's poverty reduction strategy. And in fact, my entire professional life I've been working with and on behalf of vulnerable children and youth in the work that I did prior to getting into politics. So it's an important part of, it's a priority for me personally. I know it's been a priority for this government as well. We've made some great strides. The first year of our 5-year anti-poverty strategy, we pulled 20,000 kids in this province out of poverty. There's still 400,000 kids that are poor. 150,000 of those use food banks every year. So we need to continue to work. Francis Lankin and Munir Sheikh have just released several weeks ago, I think, a seminal report. I would call it a blueprint and a foundation for moving forward. I have already said, I said at the Canadian Club that I would move forward on that, particularly the elements that speak to streamlining and simplifying, consolidating the benefits so it's more beneficial to the recipients themselves, increasing social assistance rates for the most vulnerable, and also particularly there's an aspect of their report which is often not spoken to, which talks about productive employment. In fact, Gerard talks about this, the opportunity, the possibility that whether it's individuals living with disability or those on Ontario Works, we need to make sure that
Gerard
they get the
Kennedy,
jobs.
you used to be the food bank guy. Would you accept the recommendations of the Munir Sheikh panel right now and make the improvements to social assistance that they asked for?
Yes, I would, but I do it in this context. I would say we're going to change all our social programs into potential programs. We can't afford not to maximize the potential contribution that people have. We actually have a labor market that requires the people who, 80% of disabled people who are educated, but we don't yet have them in their highest, best contribution. And we need to work with the private sector on the incentives that would help take people, maybe not completely off, maybe completely off welfare rolls and being able to support themselves. And now we have the necessity to do it because we need to do what Drummond has said. See this as a transformational opportunity, a chance to get at that. You know, when I used to work at the food bank, we had a whole warehouse staffed by people who were capable, who had sophisticated skills, but they didn't fit the rigid blocks that too many companies had. And we've got to start to break that down. We have two invocations for that. One is the deficit, and the other one is this report now that says, let's not do what Mike Harris did. He forced a bunch of people on welfare to live destabilized lives. And I'll tell you right now, part of the reason our recovery wasn't as robust is that people were hurt by too many years of hard scrabble, of not being able to get by. We want kids and we want families to be as poor for as short a time possible, and there's a new approach, if we look at potential programs, that we can do that.
Kathleen.
And I think that that's what Munir Sheikh and Francis Lankin largely are talking about when they, in their report, when they talk about particularly the disability community to work to move people into work who can. So I would work as using the Sheikh Lankin report as a starting point and implement it. But there's another aspect to this, and that is the linking of all our other policies and poverty. So, for example, in education, there are groups of kids who are either living in poverty now or going to end up in poverty. If we think about Aboriginal kids, kids in care, we know that those kids are not achieving the way they should. Aboriginal kids do not graduate at the same rates as kids in other parts of the community. So we got to lift those kids up. We got to make sure those kids do well so they don't end up in poverty.
Sandra Pupatello.
I think even in 2003, when we started that government back then under Dalton McGuinty, we had a $6 billion deficit, and we still did right by people who were the most vulnerable. We improved all those services for people with developmental disabilities. We created the passport system. We increased welfare rates. We helped change regulation to make it easier for people who are on disability to work. We did those things even when we had a deficit before. We can do it again. And because I'm talking about jobs in the economy, that means jobs for people who are on welfare, jobs for people who have disabilities. If we focus on jobs in the economy, I believe everything else will follow, and I intend to do that.
First, Glenn Murray and then Harinder Tucker.
First of all, my son, I fostered, parented, had fetal alcohol syndrome. There's a lot of kids out there who just don't fit well, who need help. And we really have to focus energy. I've seen that firsthand. I know my son now is very successful as a father. I'm proudly a grandfather. He wasn't given much chance of that. And that's this sort of, sometimes people believe in a lot more than a job. So I've already talked about jobs, so I'll just park that for now. But it's a whole new economy. To get a decent job out of poverty, you need a university or college education or a trade. That wasn't true when most of us were in school.
You sure got to get out of high school to get in.
We have to get, no, but it's not enough. We actually know. The Premier said this many, many times. So our challenge now, which beyond what Munir and Francis said, is to get those folks to that level of education and to make sure that it's the right kind of skills. The You and Who programs that I started with Sheldon at that actually match kids in university and college to where the jobs are when you go to get a degree. And we need to do more market labor stuff. But getting out of poverty is more choices. So we have to have, and I'll finish this, Eric and I and Laurel Broughton did the social innovation thing. We've engaged 8,000, Tim brought in 8,000 amazing Ontarians. There's a policy sitting there that's fully funded that we could move out right now, and I think all of us would agree with it. Kathleen has been a big advocate of social enterprise, that we as Liberals uniquely created, and we're not yet using it. It's a strategy to get those million people on social assistance off. Where I disagree with Munir and Francis is, I don't think people with disabilities should be separately tracked. And Gerard has said this, and I agree with him. We need to have a strategy for people with disabilities. It cannot be a social assistance strategy.
Okay.
It has to be an enabling strategy.
Tucker, last word on this.
Steve, I mean, how do you get people out of poverty? I came to this country in 1974 with less than $10 in my pocket. By any definition, I will be in the poverty range, or maybe below poverty range. So I think the best thing to do is get people jobs, so they can become self-sustaining, give them the skills so they can become successful in their life. But I did here when I came to this country, I studied at night, worked during the day, improved myself, and at the end of the day, I opened my businesses. If I had stayed in the same rut, right, with the $7 and not having the qualification or not having the experience to provide. So my feeling is, at the end of the day, what you really need to do is focus on the economy, create jobs, give the people the opportunity so that they can actually work and get out of the rut of this poverty. Okay. Otherwise, it's never
literally down, forgive me, we're down to our last minute and a half here, and I have one last question, which some of you may find helpful and some of you may find unhelpful. 59% of Canadians live in provinces led by women. Is it time for Ontario to join the majority? What do you think, Kathleen Wynne?
I think that's a great idea.
What do you think, Sandra Pupatello?
I think it's time for an Italian woman.
Carl Sousa, what do you think?
I think it's time for a person who has the skills necessary, who has an economic background, who has a private sector experience to enable the success of this
Is it time for Ontario to join the majority?
It's always time for Ontario to have a woman premier in the sense of. But
we're
going to. We need the best leader that people think is necessary for these times, and there's no woman seated at this table that wants any help to get get there. And
On the merits,
yeah,
Steve, on
yeah.
the merits.
We certainly have two fine female candidates in this race, and I trust the Liberal Party to actually make the right decision and choose the individual, man or woman, who will best represent the party and best represent the
Is it
province.
time, Harinder Thakkar, for Ontario to join the majority?
But I think it's, yeah, I don't know what majority means. Okay, to me is everybody, whosoever is the best should be able to win this race. Doesn't
time
matter
for new politics.
where you come from, where you live, where do you live. I think at the end of the day, everybody should have the equal
Last 20
opportunity
seconds to
compete.
Glenn Murray.
Very quickly, there's a time when gay people couldn't get elected. And one of the things I believe in, one of the reasons I'm a liberal, is it shouldn't matter whether you're a man, a woman, brown, white, old, young, have an ability or disability. Gender, geography, age, language, our heritage shouldn't matter. And the best person should do it. And if the best person is a woman, it's a woman. But if it's a woman, it better be one of these two, because the other option is not one I'm prepared to vote for.
Okay, and on that note, I want to thank all 7 of you for coming up to TVO today and having this Liberal leadership candidates debate. We thank you very much for making the trip.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.